Hey everybody, it's Georgia Weedman here, author of Penetration Testing, a hands-on introduction to hacking, and your instructor for this accompanying lab. So we're back again today to look at a vulnerability on a Linux system. It's kind of gives it away in the name, Samba Cry, remote code execution. SMB in general, server message block, has a pretty long history of really great exploits. Particularly on the Windows side, your MS08, 067s, things like that. And, Eternal Blue, Eternal Romance, some in the middle between there. There was an 0950 that was pretty good for, Vista. Lots of good stuff. And, the Samba side for Linux, same sort of deal. The great thing about it, of course, is running on a port, and it's also running as root or system, which if you can exploit something like that, you can often, end up with those privileges yourself. So, things like databases or the SMB server or what have you can be, really great places. I mean, I think I and many other pen testers I know, something we might do is actually, just spin out an nmap scan that looks for port 445 open anywhere, just to try and get an easy win at the beginning to start getting on some boxes and, start making some lateral movement. And unfortunately, a lot of times it works really well. You'll find at least a couple things that are missing some of their patches, and you can get an easy win like that just on a single box and maybe be able to turn that into domain admin depending on what you get. But anyway, enough about pen tester horror stories, and let's actually move on to our lab. It's the usual. Dot 2 is going to be you, dot 3 is going to be the target, and then for the flags, it's just we need to get a flag on the box for this one. So let's play. So IP adder, and yours is going to be different than mine, of course. So if yours isn't working, first thing to check, make sure you are using your own IP address for your own lab machine. And so, let's just start out as we usually do, maybe just a quick version scan with nmap, see what we're up against here. Based on what the title is, Samba Cry, my guess is we're looking at port 445 on a Linux machine that has a vulnerability in Samba. That would be my guess anyway. So anyway, it looks like, sure enough, port 445 is open. The version is not particularly helpful. It just says it's Samba and BD 3.x and 4.x. Okay, so it's something, right? That's not particularly helpful. But what we can do, we can certainly start looking at, any of our usual ways of, playing with vulnerabilities, looking for them that we learned. Since this is in the Metasploit section, I'll just go ahead and pull up MSF console. That is the console for Metasploit. So that's MSF Metasploit Framework console, and that will open up this console guy here. I guess I should move this over like I'm supposed to. And your text might be different. It does have different ASCII art. Anyway, all right, so the first thing I actually want to do, to kind of make this video even longer than it needs to be, is actually get an idea of the vulnerability. So I do want to use auxiliary. So if you haven't seen auxiliaries previously, these are just modules that do other stuff, which I know is not a very good answer to the question of what auxiliaries do. But anyway, so auxiliaries do scanning, vulnerability discovery, finding out there are just port scanners actually in the auxiliaries. So it's a lot of different other modules that do a lot of different other stuff. You see up here at the top, we got exploits, auxiliaries, and post. So there's also post, which is post exploitation. So modules that, after we've run an exploit and we have an open session with a target system, we can automate post-exploitation, which we will look at a bit later on. We've also got payloads, so that's going to be what happens, after the exploitation. Do you want to, get a command shell? Do you want to get, a little bit extra with Metasploit's special payload interpreter? Do you want there's actually one for Windows that it will talk to the speech API and make the computer say you got pwned, which, depending on your learning style or your students' learning styles, if you're ever teaching, that one might be fun. Kids tend to like it. Anyway, so actually getting back to the task at hand. So if we look at auxiliary scanner, and I guess, since this is like a kind of sort of first Metasploit, we kind of looked at it previously, but anyway, so you can actually see the code for Metasploit. It's at user share. Let's get this out of the way. Metasploit-framework, and then in here we have the modules. So it is nice and modular. So, all the stuff we just talked about, auxiliary exploits, what have you. So if we go into auxiliary, so it's kind of built all the same way. So if we're looking at something for like scanners, we'd go into scanner, and then it's by service. But, if we looked at, say, the exploits, and we say we were going after, well, this is Linux, so Linux, and then again it's by service, so ours would be Samba, and then these are all the Samba exploits that it has for Linux. I believe is known pipe name is the one we're looking for this one, but these are all written in Ruby, so it's, if there ever was a reason to know Ruby, I think it would probably be this, that you can write Metasploit modules. Actually, you can write Metasploit models while knowing a very, very minimal amount of Ruby. But nonetheless, it's certainly, I guess the big player in Ruby for security people is Metasploit. Anyway, so auxiliary scanner, SMB, and I think it's SMB version. Yes, I love tab complete in Metasploit, and I love actually remembering the names correctly. The hardest part for me is spelling auxiliary. I always want to put an extra L in there. All right, so once we say use and a module name, that does put us into the context of that module. So, black and red basically look the same to a colorblind person, but supposedly that says something there. And so we can do a show option, so that'll show us our options for the module. Most of them we can probably ignore. In most cases, the important one that we're always going to need is to tell it, where it needs to go. So that's where that our hosts comes from. So that's going to be the remote host that we want to target. We could, if we were interested, I guess, set up the SMB domain. You actually see in the nmap that it's just work group. It's not a domain anyway. We don't have username and password for it. So we're not authenticating it. We're only going after one host. So, one thread should be plenty to do this in a reasonable amount of time. So all we have to do is do set, then what we want to set, in our case, our hosts, and then what we want to set it to. So no equal signs or anything. You just set our hosts and then what we want to set it to, which is going to be that .3. Remember, we're .2. Our target is .3. And so that's all we have to do for now. We can just say run. You can say run. You can say exploit, their alias. But technically this isn't an exploit. So we'll just say run. And it says host could not be identified Unix. So it's some sort of Unix, Linux, whatever. And it's Samba 4.1.17. From there we could start Googling. It kind of says in the title, but Samba Cry, definitely, a fun one. And it's fun because it's, for a Pentester, training is great because it's, remote code execution on Linux with a Metasploit module, which, it's kind of hard to get Windows systems that have vulnerabilities on them and put them in the cloud. They generally frown upon that. So, this is nice. And, it's always good to find cool things like this. So, I definitely encourage you to look up details of the module. It's actually fairly new, 2017. So here's from Rapid7 who makes Metasploit info about the module. And, it has Samba versions 350. God, number dyslexia for the win. And 414. So what did we say this guy was? 4117. So it looks like it should definitely be vulnerable. And, module options, what have you. But, it is known pipe name is it. So, we can also use the check command that we know. So if we do use and exploit, I assume it's Linux, and then we just saw it, right? Samba, and then is known pipe name, tab complete. Show our options for this guy. Same deal. We can probably ignore all of this. Our hosts, of course, we need to set our port set for us 445. And so if we set our host same as we did, and we'll just leave the rest. Exploit targets automatic. Automatic targeting is always fun because then we don't have to tell it who to target. It really just depends on the module whether it's able to target automatically or not. I could go into the deep nitty gritty of like how memory corruption works and whether or not it can be platform independent. And it's not very interesting unless you're into that sort of thing, which we don't really cover it in this class. Anyway, so since this is an exploit, we can see if it has the check function. And it looks like it has a writable share called exploitable. That's helpful. And it appears to be vulnerable. So, I haven't just completely hand waved and said, well, the title says that it's vulnerable to this, so it probably is. I've at least given you, some indication that it probably is, which is good, I guess. Anyway, so since this is an exploit, we could just go ahead and throw it, but we can also, just make sure we could show our payload. So that's only going to show us the payloads that are compatible with this module. And Metasploit will default if you don't set a payload. It will default the payload. So you can skip this part almost all of the time, depending on what you're trying to do. If you're wanting to say send it off and have like your box in the cloud that's running a listener catch it, but then launch it from your laptop, you would actually have to go in and set the options for the payload. But most of the time, like I said, you can probably ignore it. It looks like there's only one compatible payload with this one anyway, so really no reason to set it. We'll do it in a different module probably, but it's command Unix interact, so it's just gonna create a interactive shell with us. So no meterpreter this time, but Windows meterpreter is the best anyway, and this is Linux, so you're not missing too terribly much this time. Anyway, so if we did need to set the payload, we'd set it the same way we would anything else. Set payload, and then Unix command Unix interact. Show our options from there. It would show you payload options as well. So not a particularly interesting list of payloads here, but definitely something you need to know. Like I said, most of the time you can ignore it, but it's always good to know anyway. So let's say exploit and see what happens. It writes out some things about what it's doing, which is always helpful. I do encourage you to, take a look at how any of these exploits work. So it looks like we did get a command shell, and that's great. So, we should just be able to run Linux commands from there. Who am I? It's always nice to come up as root. Like I said at the beginning of this video where I rambled on about it, SMB is definitely a place where this has happened time and time again in the history of security, that it's been a great place to find the easy wins. Like I said, it's, doing a map, just look for, if there's a bunch of systems out there and you're, just getting started on your pen test, see what's open on 445. It, can often be a really great, use of your time. Just like, okay, these are all the things for 445. What versions are they running? What are they vulnerable to? Can I get in? And, more often than not, sadly, I would say that has been a first step towards, complete and total annihilation. Anyway, all right, so I believe all the flags are in temp on Linux. I could be wrong. And we could certainly, do some command line foo. I actually think in your lab manual there is some command line foo for it. But anyway, let's just see if it's in temp flag. Oh, I was right. You'd think I wrote this stuff myself, which is both true and not, I guess. Anyway, so that should be your flag. Don't just copy paste it from here. But yeah, that's our first exploit, and we will be back next time to do some more Metasploit. See you guys next time.